Welcome, everyone. My name is Ross Jordan. I'm the curatorial manager at the Jane Addams Hull House Museum. Jane Addams Hull House Museum is located on the campus of the University of Illinois, Chicago, and draws upon the legacy of international peace activists, suffragists, and feminists, Jane Addams, and the other social reformers who lived and worked alongside their immigrant neighbors to expand democracy on the near west side of Chicago. The museum connects histories of the Hull House settlement to present-day social justice issues. I want to welcome everyone to part 2 of our Museums and Social Justice public program series, presented in partnership with the Museum and Exhibition Studies program at the University of Illinois, Chicago. The Museums and Social Justice series explores the creative potential of museums to facilitate social change and champion issues that serve the common good. Jane Addams Hull House Museum has been at the forefront of rethinking and transforming museum practice, and museum and social justice issues feel more relevant today than ever before. In 2020, more museums than ever before are trying to understand social justice issues and address them, and the public is demanding more of their public organizations than ever before. Museums also face new challenges brought on by COVID-19 that uncover some of the deeper injustices in American museums and arts institutions. Museums are some of the most trusted public institutions that we have, and how they share our human story, build community partnerships, and preserve our history is important. Tonight, we're filling in the gaps in that history, particularly the history of feminist arts organizations in Chicago and how their legacy impacts artists and arts organizations today. Jane Addams herself co-founded a number of social justice organizations, most notably the ACLU and the NAACP, and the Women's League for Peace and Freedom. Lesser known, Addams was also behind the Three Arts Club of Chicago, a residential and social club for women artists working in music, drama, and the visual arts. Just this week, Three Arts, now in its 108th year, granted women, women of color, and deaf and disabled artists over $400,000 in its largest award year in the organization's history. In a moment when artists of all kinds and arts organizations of all kinds are needed more than ever to help us understand how to process and transform this current moment, the legacy of our feminist organizations is a powerful one and ripe for examination and re-examination. A truthful examination of our past will help us understand the present so that we can inform our collective futures. Tonight, we are lucky to be joined by Meg Duguid and the editor of the brilliant new volume. I'm going to pull it up, Where the Future Came From. Meg is joined by some of the collaborators and contributors to this years-long collective research project that examined feminism in Chicago's arts-run organizations and institutions from the time of Jane Addams' life to the present day. Near the end of tonight's program, we will have time for questions, so please use the Q&A function. If you're joining us on Zoom or if you're on Facebook Live, use the comment function to ask questions throughout the program, and we will do our best to gather them up and answer them as we go. To introduce Meg Duguid, I'm going to bring in Anthony Septer. Anthony Septer is the Assistant Director of Museums and Exhibition Studies graduate program at the University of Illinois, Chicago. He holds a master's degree in visual and cultural studies from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Anthony has curated exhibitions and projects for ACRE, the Washington Park Arts Incubator at the University of Chicago, and Critical Distance Center for curators in Toronto, among other sites. He serves a juror as Apex Art and collaborated with the Office of Public Culture in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Most relevant to tonight's discussion, Anthony co-curated Extinct Entities, a month-long performance series of commissioned artworks exploring the histories of Chicago-based art institutions and spaces that no longer exist. Welcome, Anthony, to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? I'll just have to hope that you can. Let me first say that I'm so excited for tonight's conversation. This is going to be a brief introduction because I cannot wait to speak about this great exhibition and text. And I want to hear about that. So, but let me please start by saying thank you so much to Ross and everyone at the Jane Addams Hull House Museum for inviting me to be a part of this. And thank you all for the series. As someone who works in museums and works with people interested in continuing their own careers in museums, I think this sort of dialogue is extremely, extremely important. I will be helping mostly with the Q&A tonight. So as Ross said, please use the Q&A function and send us your questions, and we will do our best to help get as many of those answered as possible. My other role tonight is to make an attempt at introducing Meg Duguid. Meg Duguid is the Director of Exhibitions, Performances, and Student Spaces at Columbia College. Meg has also curated exhibitions like Si Se Puede, which was an exhibition attempting to connect contemporary art practice to the legacies of the work of Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez, and also the curator of this the exhibition from whence this dialogue has come. That exhibition is Where the Future Came From. In addition to being a curator, Meg is also an artist and arts administrator, and I think that's apparent in some of the projects that Meg has done over the years, including one of my favorites, period, ever, and one of the earliest projects of Meg's that I became aware of, which was Clutch, which was an artist-run project that lived in a handbag, and perhaps there will be some time to talk about that as well tonight. But Meg is going to guide most of tonight's program and tell us more about the recently published book that we are also happy to have. And so with that, I am going to stop talking and just say that I'm so happy to introduce to you all Meg Duguid.
Meg, I think you're muted.
Better? All right. So my name is Meg Duguid, and I thank you so much for that introduction. I'm also going to try to keep it brief, but in an exhibition and a book that is so long on words, sometimes you might have a little bit to say. So I'm going to spend about maybe the next 5 or 10 minutes just kind of talking about the exhibition and the book. And then we're going to actually pivot a little bit to the largest unanswered question in the book, of which there are many, and along with like the now and kind of what we're as archivists and historians and artists kind of looking at. And also, so you don't have to wait, my largest question that has come out of this research is, what does a feminist institution look like? And we will be kind of touching on that this evening. And then before I talk about the show, I just want to say a quick thank you to a few folks, because it's important to recognize that none of this happens in a vacuum. First, the amazing thinkers on this panel tonight. Their work is phenomenal, and their generosity in working on this project was boundless. Their contributions to the book are important and amazing to read. Secondly, my Columbia College colleagues who assisted in all aspects of the show: Nisa Page Lieberman, Mark Porter, Connie Stanley, and Ted Cho. Without them, we'd have no documentation nor transcripts of the presentations that are in this book. Third, the Terra Foundation for their Art Design Chicago initiative for funding the project, and Sober Scove Press and Julia Klein for being a partner in crime in printing the book. I still can't believe she agreed to do this. Also, Sonia Yoon for an incredible design of the book. And lastly, Michael Thomas, my husband, who assisted in conversation all throughout this project, and extra childcare, which is always important to recognize. All right, this book is the official documentation of the Where the Future Came From exhibition. It's a project that took place at the Glass Curtain Gallery at Columbia College, running from the end of 2018 to early 2019. The program focused on the role of the feminist artist-run activities in Chicago from the late 19th century to the project's closing. Consisting of an open source participatory exhibition, a symposium, and a series of accompanying programs, Where the Future Came From intended to create a record around the vast array of the feminist artist-run events, programs, and projects that have been organized throughout Chicago's history. The physical exhibition contained a timeline of project lining the walls of the space, a very large table intended for work and study, shelves of research materials. Each project listed in the timeline had a binder associated with it containing event information and ephemera, and many of our other materials were available for visitors to look at. The information presented was reviewed, edited, and expanded upon by scholars in residence, students, artists, historians, and viewers alike. Our visual timeline was edited directly on the wall during the run of the exhibition, creating a living document that transformed thanks to the voices and memories of many gallery visitors. During the run of the show, we had 6 scholars in residence to help contextualize this content and add more, and 4 of them are here tonight. I'm just gonna run through some quick images, super quick images. Oh my goodness, I cannot share my screen. Help. Hold on. There we go. Okay. And share. Wonderful. All right, let me just, and I'm just gonna go through these pretty quickly just so you have an idea of what the show looked like. We added contributors throughout the run of the exhibition. There are the binders and the table. Oh my goodness, this is kind of funky. I'm sorry, we did this earlier, but I didn't go through quite all of them. Okay, I'm just going to escape right out of this. Hang on, and we are going to do this a different way. We had many presenters. There we go. I bet that looks a lot better. Someone holler if it looks terrible. During the symposium, these are images from the symposium. And this is what the space looked like full. This was about as full as it got at the opening. You'll see people reading through the different booklets. This is us actually adding a timeline entry to our wall. We had community lunches. There's Joanna and I working. You can see my son in the background because childcare is always present. We had many presentations by many of the people who are on this panel today. And I'm going to stop sharing now. We just have a couple more things and then I'm going to introduce our viewers. So I want to talk a little bit about what we kind of established in the book and what we're going to kind of talk about tonight now. And one of the things in setting out the show, I had some goals that I think we did establish in the book. We proposed that the artist run is the progenitor of new forms and genres that eventually become codified in institution. We proposed that women have been at the forefront of the artist run, so women organizing in art have changed the very way we consume art. We acknowledged that history is limited in both the way this work is archived and the general lack of inclusiveness in the art world, and that's art world with a capital A. This book went to press on March 13th as our world began to seismically shift and made clear fissures that were already there. So rather than tonight focusing on the content of this book, which is important, so you should read it. I will also put my email in the chat if you ever want to talk about what's in this book. I'm happy to talk with you. But rather than tonight talking about the content directly in the book, I set some goals for tonight that look towards the future from now. I want to recognize that the work in the book and the work of the artist, the archivist, and historian is malleable and ongoing. I want to come up with new language and terms around the idea of the feminist artist run, or at least express a need for it. I want to talk about the pressures of the pandemic and what that does for visibility of women and BIPOC communities. And I want to think fully about what an inclusive art institution might look like. Now I'm going to introduce our panels. I'm going light on bio because they are in the book. So if you want the bios, they're here. But also so we can be long on content. I would like to introduce Joanna Gardner-Huggett. She's an associate professor and associate dean at DePaul University. Her research focuses on the intersection between feminism and arts activism. Her scholarship explores the history of the Guerrilla Girls, the feminist arts workers, and the origin of women artist cooperatives, Artemisia, and ARC Gallery, among other things. Tempest Hazel is a curator, writer, and artist advocate and director of 60 Inches from Center, a Chicago-based online arts publication and archiving initiative. She is also the arts program officer at the Field Foundation. Over the years, she has worked in arts administration, curating, and multidisciplinary programming at the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, Chicago Artists Coalition, Chicago Park District, and Arts and Public Life. Nicole Marroquin is an interdisciplinary artist, researcher. Hang on. Nicole Marroquin is an interdisciplinary artist, researcher, and teacher educator whose current research looks at the Chicago school uprisings between 1967 and 1974. She has been artist in residence at the Chicago Cultural Center with the Propeller Fund at Mana Contemporary, Watershed, Ragdoll Foundation, Acre, and Oxbow. She has presented projects at the New School, the Newberry Library, Harold Washington Public Museum of Art, Glass Curtain Gallery, Hull House, Northwestern University, and Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, to name a few. Jennifer Scott is the former director and chief curator of the Jane Addams Hull House. She is curator and public historian whose work explores connections between museums, arts, and social justice. She is one of the co-editors of Museums and Civic Discourse, Past, Present, and Emerging Futures. And last but not least, Melissa Potter is a multimedia artist who has exhibited at venues including White Columns, the Bronx Museum of the Arts, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, through 3 Fulbright Awards, ArtLinks, and the Soros Fund for Arts and Culture, and the Trust for Mutual Understanding. She built papermaking studios in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and collaborated with Georgian women felt artisans and activists, and developed projects with ethnographers and intangible heritage experts to protect, interpret, and archive women's handicrafts and social customs. So with that, I think everyone is now visible. It is so lovely to see everyone's faces. I just want to kind of start with what is everyone working on right now, and how has your work changed in the last year and a half? In this new world, I'm going to call on someone because it's harder than in person. So I'm just going to start with Joanna because you are right under me.
Hi, everyone. And I also want to second the thanks for Jennifer, to Ross, to Meg, and to Julia for making all of this happen, including the really wonderful documentation of the book. So I'd say there are 2 projects that are very much in initial stages right now, and I think are very much thanks to the exhibition and the incredible work, Meg, that you did bringing all these people together and all of these archives. And the first thing is thinking about the relationship between artistic educational networks and artist collectives. So thinking back as early as the first half of the 20th century with Kathleen Blackshear, who taught numerous female artists and mentored them, including some people like Margaret Burroughs. I've been really struck by some conversations at the DePaul Art Museum, including Nicole, when you were talking with Maria Gaspar last week about this idea about teaching as art. I thought that was just such an important thing to say that hasn't been assessed enough. And in the previous week, there was a really great conversation between Diana Solis, who is part of Mujeres Latinas en Acción, and Silvia Malagrino, who is at Artemisia, and they talked about sharing Esther Parada as a teacher. And so in thinking about those nodes, those really kind of concentrated points of contact that help inspire kind of collective practice across the history of Chicago. Also thinking with the collective Sapphire and Crystals, people like Marva Pitchford Jolly, Joyce Owens, Juarez Hawkins, who taught at Chicago State, and how that's another kind of node to look at. And then the second, actually, sorry, one more thing I wanted to say in terms of nodes is also the Park District. So I was really struck in conversations during the exhibition how important the Park District has been for artists, particularly in terms of performance, again, in teaching. So that's something I'd like to look at. And then again, the second project is looking more closely at the Black Women's Collective Sapphire and Crystals, which I've written about kind of in conversation with Artemisia and ARC, but now wanting to better understand how the women in this group follow in the footsteps of their female elders like Margaret Burroughs, Owawande Olu had the Osun Gallery, and kind of seeing this long history of facilitation that's happening. So those are the two things. Thanks.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much. Nicole, you are right under Joanna in my screen.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about this, and I felt like, oh, I had all these things to talk about, and then I had one of those days, you know, where I feel very overwhelmed. My entire life is, you know, in my house like everybody else, but I'm teaching a lot more than usual. And so, and my kids are here, you know, we're all here. And what that does to me is, it makes me think about how to make the teaching the art. And so, yeah, Joanna, I was just thinking about how there's been this shift in my mind, right? That there's, what is this? It's somewhere between Jorge Lucero's Zoomposium of wild conceptual art, the 6-hour marathon that he did that I was part of this summer. And I was like, phew, and started to think about, you know, the materiality of the classroom in this classroom, right? I'm also teaching this pretty rad group of students. And we're, you know, of course, you know, reading a lot about rebellion and anti-schooling and deschooling, you know, it's part of learning to be a teacher. And they're kind of like, they kind of revolted. And you know, they're in the classroom now, right? They're starting to teach. And so they're teachers. So it's a room full of teachers. And I'm, you know, not that into hierarchy anyway. And so they've kind of turned the class into a walking as art class, that our practice is now walking as the teaching and learning and art making practice. And it's completely transformed the way I have thought about stuff. I'm not going to do it justice because it has just been born, right? Just been born. It's really rad. I think what I'm getting at is, this is a time for teachers to think and rethink, right? There's so much that is falling apart in terms of education, and it's time to reimagine it. So on that note too, I'm really excited to be designing a course around Diana Solis's work for next semester. And I'm super excited that I won an award, so that I'm going to be bringing in, this isn't the ideal way to announce this, because I was going to come to y'all separately and ask you to do things with this, but it's going to be sort of asynchronously, and in part at Latitude, where we're actually going to be making the scans and the prints. So there will be physical prints to look at, and having artists respond to the work for an exhibition. It's just happening at a lightning speed. But, you know, here we are at our computers all day. Why not? And that's one thing I'm working on. I'm really excited about a couple of things, but I'm not working on them, and I'll save them for later, I think. Are we passing the mic, or are we just?
Yeah, you know, pass it.
Okay, cool. Maybe Melissa.
Well, that was a good one. You read my mind, because I was going to say a lot of the same things about teaching. I'm a maker who had to stop, drop, and recreate my whole delivery system to the online environment. And I think, well, I mean, a lot of my work is about the marginalization of pedagogical work by women crafters, by women craft artisans. I work a lot with the critical theory of people like Jenny Sorkin, who are trying to argue for the making being the center of the process as much as the object. But I echo so much of what Nicole had to say. And I also think it's really important as feminists, we look at the tremendous invisible labor of women pedagogues, of mothers I'm a mother myself, trying to homeschool. It's been a time of that is humbling beyond words, even within my own feminism, coming to a reckoning of what I have taken for granted in terms of other people helping me care for my children, for my child. So all of that takes up a huge amount of space, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of being part of what is one of the most important conversations happening in culture right now. The project that I'm praying I finish soon is a film and book project about Marilyn Sward, who is the co-founder of the Center for Book and Paper at Columbia College Chicago. The story revolves around a lost portfolio that I saved from the trash that was never properly archived, and it's a journey to understand her process through that, but ultimately the story of legacy and how we as feminists have the capacity to rethink a legacy and also to make legacy a living work, and how I bring her legacy forward, not through the endless boxes that I'll never be able to archive properly, but through my teaching. She had an incredible quote that's been sort of my guiding principle that frames what I do right now in terms of my writing and thinking. The object is the source, the making of the object is the center. And I don't totally understand that. So, I'm really trying to engage that idea as a feminist theory, thinking about how we rethink a world saturated with objects and things and money and power. So. Oh, and I'm going to pass the mic to Tempest, who I have not seen in so long, and who, like every woman on this panel, I'm a complete super fan. Love you, and it's so beautiful to see you. So I'm passing the mic.
So good to see you too. So good to see all of you. I feel like I just want to fangirl this whole conversation. So what have I been up to? Oh, that's a really hard question to answer at this time, but I'll try my best. And it also depends on which hat I'm wearing. So I'm not a parent, but I'm a auntie, and I've been giving sibling support very deeply in this time. So I feel like that's been a huge project of really being able to understand from an auntie's perspective what you all are going through and what you and Nicole are talking about, Melissa. But with my field hat on, working as a grant maker, it's been a tough time. So I've been working on trying to find footing and trying to understand where the role that philanthropy plays in this moment in various ways, and trying to spend a lot of time listening to what artists and what the arts community really is needing right now, and what's going on and how it's responding, and also being able to learn from that. So that feels like just like a huge project in and of itself, to try to understand the shifts as they're happening and as the ground below us isn't quite stable. Within the work of 60 Inches from Center and more of my curatorial and writing work, we just this week released an archival project, an editorial project called Lost Capture. And it's really, it's meant to be a project that thinks about how important archives and preservation and the work of this exhibition, the importance of that preservation in how we understand value and how we understand ourselves, and being able to make sure, especially in a time when things are so digital, that we need to really be thoughtful of how those materials, those records, that history is kept, so that we can refer back to it. So this project really brings together archivists, artists, activists to talk about that, to have that conversation, and to really kind of love on archives and that work and that practice, but also the materials, just the richness of the histories that, like I feel like one thing that I haven't done is I've never been in Whole House's archives at all, but I just have fantasies of what's in there. And same, I think about, you know, Nicole, I think about your work so much because I think you're one of the artists whose work makes me fall in love with archives all over again every time I see it. But that project has been a year in the making. We started working on it last summer when we heard about the Center for Black Music Research going through some things, and also the Johnson photo archives being put up to auction. And we just wanted to have this conversation in a deeper way and call attention to some of the challenges as well as the beauty of archives, and specifically Black archives. So that's been the huge project for the past year that we're finally kind of seeing come into form. So yeah. And then I guess Jennifer is the last person I'll pass to.
Thank you, Tempest. Tempest, when you just said that you're loving on archives, I saw everybody on screen's face light up. It's like such kindred spirits about history and teaching and archiving. It made me miss you all. So thank you again, Meg, for your vision and creating this project and the work and the exhibition that is the prompt to bring us all together. So nice to have this kind of interaction with all of you. And also for including Hull House in the project, the history of the women at Hull House and the ways that they embedded arts and culture in their social change project. So lots of changes. I think most of the changes in the last year and a half, especially under COVID, like everyone else, is repivoting. So at Hull House, there were 2 exhibitions that we had created that were extensions of these larger issues about justice with feminist lenses, of course. One was Why Women Should Vote, which is taking a look at the 100th anniversary of the fight for women's right to vote, at that struggle, but also at the longer look of women in electoral politics, women's leadership, women's impact on the public sphere, and especially thinking as we come up to this critical election in just a couple of weeks. We have a woman VP candidate, a Black woman, and we also wanted to highlight in that exhibition the long history as well of racism and feminism. So the lack of acknowledgement, speaking of archives on the record, of Black women and other women of color, Indigenous women who have not been as valued and acknowledged in that history for all sorts of reasons for their contributions. So we started a public series, a programming series that we kicked off earlier this year and then had to pivot and postpone, but we've revitalized everything, called With You or Not at All, which are Ida B. Wells' words. And it was her response when she was asked to march in a segregated parade. She said she refused. And so we have this public programming series that's looking at those omissions of Black women and women of color in this history, but also in present ways, looking at racism and feminism. So the other exhibition that we had was True Beasts, The Presence of Justice, looking at the long history of women human rights activism and peace organizing that dates back at least to Jane Addams helping to found the American Peace Party, Women's Peace Party in 1915. But looking at this history of violence of the patriarchal nation state and how they were objecting to it. And then again, as we always do, we would bring it up to the present to ask about present day social justice questions. What does peace organizing look like now? What does it look like in Chicago? So we worked with 2 artists, Monica Trinidad and Sarah G., 2 contemporary artists who've been documenting activism in Chicago, at least for the last 10 years, which their work demonstrates has been wholly led and energized by Black women and queer communities of color, which I think, in Chicago at least, which I think is really important to highlight. So we had all this rich content and then we had to close under COVID. So a lot of my time since March and the summer and with the staff has been locating funding, resources, and partnerships to make sure that we can still have access and free access to this content. The good thing is that a lot of people, there's a demand for it. So a lot of people were looking for this kind of content. So I think that's a really good sign. we also had kicked off a Museum of Social Justice series, which we had to put off until the fall. And again, we were successful in getting all the resources to relaunch. And so happy to say that, you know, even this program, which is the second iteration, is a part of that feminist practice. I would consider it an extension. So at the end of the summer, late summer, I resigned from Hull House, and I have been working on a number of independent projects. I teach at the New School in New York in arts and civic engagement and museums and social justice, and I've continued to teach there. But I've also been recently appointed as the co-chair of the city's new Monuments and Memorials Advisory Committee. And so a lot of my focus has been on the public art built landscape, which is certainly gendered and certainly fills emissions, which we can talk about more. But anyway, that's sort of what I've been working on for now. So.
Amazing. So my internet connection is currently unstable. So if I freeze, I will drop the next question in the chat. So I'm going to actually combine the next two questions because they were meant to be together anyway, just so I make sure that we really get to the question that I want to answer the most, and also that we can get to audience questions. And for the audience, I think I'm just going to reiterate that we're not necessarily talking specifically about the history in the book. Instead, we're going to be talking about the kind of tenets that many of the organizations kind of lived through, and like about kind of women in general. Can anyone hear me? Okay, just making sure. And in general, like kind of visibility and that sort of thing. And then hopefully we'll get to more questions a little bit later. So I want to just kind of echo some of the things that I've been hearing from our panelists in my own life. So right now, my kitchen table, and sometimes my office, is my homeschool. It is the place where the whole family eats. It is currently the place where I am fostering 4 adorable kittens with a baby bottle because they happen to show up on my doorstep with no mother. And also the place where I do my job, right? It's kind of everything. My partner and I also run the Visualist. It is the headquarters for the Visualist, among other things. And what I can say is that a number of weeks ago, Nicole shared this amazing article talking about how women's submissions to journals are down by like 40%. That's not the entries, that's just the submissions. And really what that's attributed to is the extra pressures of women taking care of children or families. Lots of people are taking also care of parents right now, and that's even more unseen than families. So I want to just kind of talk about that. And I immediately, like, I'm going to be honest, burst into tears and then wrote a rant. Because in all honesty, there have been a lot of tears because my art practice is on life support right now. Some of the things that I want to do, I can't do because I need to take care of folks. So I have a job. I'm a white woman in Chicago with a job. So one could extrapolate that it is, that I don't have it as hard just by the numbers as other folks. So I want to talk about who's getting left out right now and how pressures are kind of potentially creating a moment where people are going to yet again be left out of archives. So much of the work of the Artist Run has been centered around caring for our own humanity. In this current layered crisis of COVID-19, racial injustice, and climate change, they're putting additional pressures on women-identified artists. How has this informed what is happening or not happening, both in artist communities as well as archivists and historian communities? And conversely, what are the new relationships being made right now? And what kind of things do we want to bring forward from this period onward? And I'm putting it in the chat in case some of that came out.
Oh, I heard you and I thought of something right away, and it might not be a long thing, but I'm not sure if this is something being left out now, but the idea of what is included is definitely embedded in this project. Y'all know, surely all know, Irina Zardov, who works with Park District, right? Again, the Park District is just a phenomenal point of access. But Irina is working on this phenomenal project, as she was telling me, inspired by Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategies, which is being read and reread and read and reread in my house. It's a whole different book right now than it was last year. And also, of course, the teachings of Mariame Kaba. And from that, she's doing this project called Small is All. And it's this art project that's sort of the anti-monumental man land art. Maybe it'll be so tiny we won't even be able to find it to put it in the archive. I mean, that's one solution. Anyway, I'm such a super fan of that project, and we got so excited about it, talking about it in this group of students that revolted, that now everything is like this big. I mean, really though, I couldn't think of a reason against it, and if I could, I don't think I'm the boss anymore, so I just wanted to mention that.
Nicole, can you put that in the chat? That would be awesome.
They put out some curriculum already. It's really amazing.
Awesome. I'd love to see that. I mean, since we're in the vibe of me following on the heels of Nicole, because we clearly have so much in common, and it's funny that we haven't like really, I mean, we know each other, but we haven't ever really overlapped. Watch out. I like collaborating with people. I will come to a station near you quickly. I'd like to sort of invert this question a little bit and say something that I don't want to take forward, which I think is a fundamentally feminist principle, and that's slowing down. One of the things I think has been really toxic about this switchover that all of us have made, whether we're working from home or redesigning classes, we all arrived at this moment where there was a lot of good talk about how we're going to radically re-envision the world. And yet we didn't get much time, or any time for most of us, to actually stop and percolate on A, what that means, B, take care of ourselves. I mean, I feel like I'm running on fumes. I'm sure everybody here is. So I would call for slowness, that actually part of the work of race, class, and gender justice is to slow down, because it's the capital system that forces us to move quickly through things. That said, I'll leave with I have served for a couple of years as the VP of the College Art Association conference, and we're trying to move it into a virtual space. You can imagine what that's like. It's been a lot of long nights and a lot of vodka. But the amazing thing about it is that we are able to invite people to the table in a way we never have before. So I think the virtual space is a democratizing, is that a word, tool that is potentially deeply feminist in its practice. I've noticed a couple of funders step up with funding around internet access, which I think is really amazing, and providing people that capacity. So.
All right, Tempest, I mean, since we're going in order, do you want to talk?
Yeah, I was kind of looking at the question, trying to figure out which angle to take with it, because there's so much to say. You know, I think one of the things that so I would never call myself an archivist, but working alongside and being in conversation with archivists, I think an interesting thing that has emerged from this moment is, and what has been directly connected and conversation has been happening around documentation and of protest and just the ins and outs of doing that and what that looks like. You know, as much as the preservation advocate in me thinks that, you know, like I desire to have a full as possible of a record of this moment, but at the same time, like knowing history too, how that documentation has been used against certain folks, and what it means is now, and especially in the age of phones and all of the documentation that goes digital, I've been really interested in the conversations that archivists have been having with activists and folks that document movement work, and being able to, you know, have a conversation about how to do that thoughtfully and carefully, while also being able to make sure that this moment is, you know, this moment, these movements, I mean, it's so much more than a moment, but that it's documented, but in a way that keeps everyone safe, especially some of the most vulnerable people within these conversations. So that's been really amazing to watch. Yeah, that's what comes to mind at the moment.
Joanna, do you want to talk?
Sure. So all of that really resonates in a lot of ways. I think it was maybe the end of June. My husband, who is an academic at UIC, actually announced, "This is great. I've got 6 articles done. I reviewed a book manuscript. It's great." Meanwhile, I was pretty much, you know, in tears, I think, because I was thinking, I'll be lucky if I revise the one thing that's coming out in the next few months. I'm also an administrator, so I'm an associate dean. So Mel, your discussion about slowness is something I bring up all the time. So I remind the dean, you know, people are working at home, they're in their bedrooms, they're in their kitchens. You got to give people a break. Like, they can't come up with a new program right now. Like, we just need to provide the infrastructure. So I also hear a lot of this sense of slowness, we're going to re-examine, but at the same time, that upper corporate structure of the university is just propelling everything really forward too fast. In relationship to the archives and what you were talking about, Tempest, I was at a meeting, I think it was last week, with our advisory board called Humanities X, that is doing humanities-based work, collaborating with various partners. And one is Beverly Cook at the Vivian Harsh Library. And she said something that really kind of hit home at that moment. And she said, the greatest problem at the moment is I'm preaching to the converted. So, you know, those people who have access to Zoom, those people who are just going to continue to do the work no matter what, they're fine. But I'm thinking about the people who can't drop into the library, who don't have those chance encounters and don't talk about how they can preserve the things that you were talking about.
Great, Jennifer.
Can you hear me now? Oh, good. Sorry, I got cut off by Zoom somehow. But, so I didn't follow exactly where we are. Are we still at the first question? The first two questions you were asking?
Yeah, so I put them in the chat because my internet is also unstable.
Oh, okay.
So much of the work of the Artist Run has been centered around caring for our humanity. In this current world of layered crisis, COVID-19, racial injustice, and climate change, they're putting additional pressures on women identified artists. How has this informed what's happening or not happening in both artist communities as well as archivists and historian communities? And conversely, what are the new relationships being made right now? And what kinds of things do we want to bring forward from this period onward?
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. And I heard some threads about slowness and archives and exclusion. And I think what stands out the most to me of what you're reading, Meg, is the layers. You know, there's this overwhelming layer that I'm hearing, you know, of all these added responsibilities too. But I guess I was keying more into something I think both Tempest and Nicole, you mentioned earlier about the reflection, you know, that even though we're fighting for those those moments of reflection all the time, that reflection time, and what it can do. And one of the things that I've been really sort of heartened about in the museum and arts world is the huge reckoning that's going on that I think might be connected to reflection, because a lot of it's being led by women and women of color. But writing all of the open letters to museums and arts institutions and theaters that are calling for accountability from boards and, you know, boards and staffing, and to question leadership, have people analyze their leadership and their inclusion of artists or exclusion of artists. I mean, I think that call for accountability long overdue, even though it's probably some of the first times that people are actually taking it seriously or having to be pushed to do that. And unfortunately, you know, it feels like they had to be pushed in some instances. But I think in terms, you know, thinking about the topic and feminist spaces and, you know, anticipating the question about what that looks like, I think if you still lack participation or by women of color in your museums or art spaces or academic, whatever it is, I'm not sure you can call yourself a feminist space. I mean, at this point, I think this is such a serious charge, and I love the reckoning that's happened, because it's about time, but I don't think it's coincidental that it's happening in arts and cultural spaces. I mean, that's the lack of the neglect and the lack of acknowledgement and the omissions has been going on for far too long. So sort of like a mixed bag, I guess, but I'm encouraged by that. I think that's important to consider in our conversation.
And can I add just one thing that Jennifer, and all of your comments kind of reminded me of it. When it comes to like what to bring forward, I remember when the exhibition happened and I was hanging out in the gallery with you, Meg, and we were talking about how, because in my piece for the book, I write about Dr. Adams and the Catalyst Group, and thinking about how when they formed, they did their programming that was completely mindful of the fact that they were hoping families would attend. So they would have simultaneous programming that was similarly very politically charged, very kind of like educational, that ran alongside the like adult programs. So there's a way in which, you know, not being a parent, of course, like I can't completely speak for this or to this, but my hope is that with this merging, even though I'm sure it's driving all of us crazy to a certain extent to be at home, for those of us who are at home doing our work, to be there, but maybe this will get us to a place where folks understand family and work relationships, and that it'll break down some of the barriers that we create around that, around the invisibility of family, of parenting, of caretaking, and be able to, like, on the whatever other side of this that we might see, that it might just be more welcoming and open to that.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Tempest. I remember when I saw that program, I think tears came into my eyes. Like, Tempest opened up this, like, the most amazing book of treasures. And yeah, I think tears came into my eyes when I saw that program. Oh, dear Lord, I think I froze. There we go, everyone's back. Sorry, guys. Comcast should not be in charge of the panda saving the world. So it just happens. But I really, like, in kind of keeping with that, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about the Artist Run and how it is also a microcosm for what we see. So I'm going to say that all of the projects in this book were not necessarily racially just, even though they centered women. And that's really apparent. And there is some shifting as we get closer to now, but I actually just think those organizations are easier to find. The organizations that were happening in 1920 made by Black women are much more difficult to kind of suss out. Did I freeze? Okay, cool. It's hard to tell. Jordan told me I didn't freeze, even though everyone else is freezing. So I just, Zoom. So I think there's an issue of kind of what's kept and what can be found and what can be sussed out. And just to be clear, this book is not a compendium. It is not a compendium of all feminist work. And really, we were talking more about collectives than individual feminists who were running projects. It's not a compendium. It's not anywhere near what has been done. It is a start. It is literally a 300-page start of stuff that more work needs to be done on, that there's not a lot of information, that there's more information that needs to be gathered and that we don't know at all. So just to kind of clarify how that book looks, and I'm gonna get to this kind of last question that I found myself really thinking about and that I think is unanswered. And that is, I think every institution and artist-run project should proudly identify as feminist. But that means we need to identify what about that would really what that would look like at the core. So what would that look like? Actually, what would it look like if institutions were truly feminist? And I'm gonna call out Jennifer, and then Jennifer is gonna pass the baton.
Oh my God, the hardest question of all. Okay.
It's the most important
every
one.
time, it is the most important one, and I think about it constantly, and I still don't have any answers. So I every time I started thinking about this, I kept going into sci-fi because I realized what we want doesn't exist yet. Sorry for technical problems. What we want doesn't exist yet, but there's elements around. So I couldn't come up with exact things, but then I started thinking, well, where I am now, what are the most important characteristics for me? And one I just mentioned earlier, I really think at this point, it can't just be about, definitely you have to be considering intersectionality of oppression. It can't just be about inclusion and multiraciality. I think at this point, we have to be centering non-white women in many ways to offset what's going on. And if you don't have that as a part, first of all, fix it. But if you don't have that as a part of what you're doing, I think you need to try to get there and to think about the ways you're attaching to, these kind of hallmarks of patriarchy, which I think are white, overvaluing whiteness, which I think we all can agree has been very conflated with patriarchal everything systems. So I think it's important to think about that in the present moment, how to sort of assertively address that. The other parts of feminist site for me is I think there has to be a space for humor all the time. It might be a personal thing, but part of it, I love humor and satire, of course, and come from that kind of a family. But I also think that stuff that's going on now, for lack of a better word, is so absurd, and I don't want to condone it. And sometimes the only way to point out the absurd, I think, is through humor and ridiculousness. So I feel like that would be nice in a feminist space, to have that as some kind of framework and parameter. Whole House, we know, I think, Meg, your comments about a lot of these collectives not being perfect, Whole House certainly fits with that, and had I been alive back then, I'm not sure I would have been even really involved. So, but I think minus the paternalism, there were parts of the Whole House project that are important to think about now. Experimentation, that trial and error. So what does failure look like? What does success look like? It's got to look different right now. And we shouldn't try things just because we think they're going to fail in the traditional sense. I feel very strongly about that because there's successes in other ways. And I also think there's a lot more work that needs to be thought about collaboration and what that looks like. It isn't just sort of everybody coming and mutuality. I think, how does interdependence look now? How does it look to play to your strengths within a collective is really important to think about. So I don't have the answers, obviously, but these are just some of the characteristics that jump out to me. I think there has to be space for disagreements, for sure. There's not just one right way to be a feminist, but I mean, I'm preaching to the choir, but I'll stop there because I'm sure there's many more smarter answers. Oh, I'm supposed to pass it. Nicole.
I could listen to you talk like that for just keep going. I'm like, yes, check. So yes, I mean, the only thing I could even add is down with the 40-hour work week. I'm done with it. Done. Everybody knows, who knows me, I work like 50, 60 hours a week. Why? It's a sickness. I mean, I like getting stuff done like anybody else, but like the way things are shaped now, every pleasure activity is sucked up into job. You know, there's no way of segregating things. That's sickening. We have, we have a lot of work to do. It is hard to think about this question because I wasn't able to think of examples. It makes it hard. But then, you know, in the way that we've tried to think about the opportunities, you know, when we say we're not going back, we're just not going back to the, you know, what was. And also too, I think it's pretty clear now that everybody's stuck on the internet that, you know, the language of diversity, like that's done. Like we need to move on. We need to move up. We need to talk about justice. And centering and promoting to leadership women, queer people, non-binary people of color, and particularly Black people in this time is essential. And I'm sitting in with a group of people here who are going to agree with me no matter what, but like history is so crucial right now. Getting to this history, talking about it. I mean, I making it as exciting and jazzy as possible. All these people that are putting all these digital archives up, thank you. I do that all day. but like there's so much opportunity in that, right? Like we have an opportunity to reassess. Oh, now we learn, for example, oh, we don't have to have standardized tests in schools all the time. Oh, okay. Right. And there's a lot of things like that coming to light, right? And I think that in this sort of, I know we're probably only halfway through the staying away from each other, and it makes me very sad to think about it that way, but we have more time to build up and assemble and be prepared for when people try to go back to the same old, and we have to refuse. Because you know what? It can't be the same. Wearing holes in our shoes, trying to get all over the place to do things there's got to be another way, because the self-care on top of 40 hours, I mean, that's like 80 hours if you know, right? Like there's some smart ideas coming out of these think tanks of people getting together. And a lot of people have said enough and have come up with fabulous solutions. That's the difference. I think a lot of young people are coming to my classes now and they're like, no, do it this way. I mean, that is a breath of fresh air. It really is. Listening to young people is going to be part of any feminist institution that is worth anything. Y'all knew I was going to say that. Oh, passing the mic. I don't remember the order. Joanna, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, you look at the youth and you think, okay, it's going to be all right. I have one son at Whitney Young, and I was just amazed by the organizing to remove police officers from the school. And although they were not successful, they haven't backed down. And the collaboration with organizations across the city is just, it's really moving. As a historian, like reflecting on what a feminist institution is or should be, and Meg knows that I really love this question and think about it a lot. The importance of assessment that you all brought up and reflection in the spaces that I've written about, the places where things have gone wrong are where people dig in their heels and they're not willing to kind of listen, to open up, to think about those other possibilities, the opportunities, as you said, Nicole, and that being important. And Ross encouraged us to see the panel from, I think it was last week or the week before, on social justice and museums. And I was really struck by what Cesaro Moreno said, when you're starting an organization, determine what's unacceptable at the start. And that really kind of, that was like ding, ding, ding. I was like, wow, if you could do that, and if you could keep that question at the center, then a lot of these other things could be really possible. Mel.
We are a funny team. I love it. So, you know, one of the things that I've struggled with my whole career is that many of the things we debate in the United States are not up for debate in other parts of the world, which is to say that one of the great failures of the human rights movement, among many, is that women are not physically safe anywhere, whether they're here in the United States or whether they're in the Republic of Georgia. So, you know, during my career, I came up at a time when people were sort of questioning the validity of political art. And I thought, you know, most of the world not only doesn't have the privilege to debate that, but also finds that sort of absurd, because we know that art actually can, you know, can topple governments when functioning properly. Feminist institutions that I've worked with in the Caucasus and the Balkans use art as a way to create safe space for women. And so it reminds me to some degree of the Labor Museum and the Hull House, which was not necessarily, it wasn't women only, but it was this idea that through a process of making and creating a space where we use our hands and we communicate in ways that are not so fraught and can engage across things that are verboten, that you can't speak about or don't wish to speak about or don't share the language of, that there's something very magical that can take place in making. So in the international community, the interdisciplinary models are so radical. So I think about like the BOSFAM project, which I interviewed and worked with in Bosnia, which works with the 500,000 incidents of rape that took place in the Balkans, 50,000 women survivors, using rug making, an ancient craft of their people, to talk about trauma and healing. And they do it through bringing lots of players to the table. So they have therapists and medical workers and childcare. And the space, so the space is animated, but I go back to Marilyn's quote, you know, the making is at the center of all of that work, so that it's not just social service, right? So when I think about what feminism does, I think that sadly, since there's still millions of women every year who are femicided and disappeared and raped and abused, that, you know, this idea of the feminist space as the safe space where women can get what they need will have to remain very present in what we take forward, especially considering the domestic violence issues that we're having during COVID. And to that, my dear Tempest.
So this is a very hard question, Meg. You know, I went through a lot of things went through my mind when I read it. And my first was, you know, my first thought jumped to the fact that there are just so many women in the arts, running institutions, working within institutions, leading institutions. And it makes me wonder why we still don't have a definition of what a feminist institution really looks like. So I have to, go back to what Jennifer said of, I just don't think we've seen it. We do have to dream it up, because as long as the systems that we exist in exist the way that they do, it's going to be hard to have any kind of feminist institution, because just the word institution itself, it kind of refers to these different structures and like boxes that we have to put ourselves in that weren't necessarily created by women. So I think about that a lot, but I definitely, if I were to dream of what a feminist institution would look like, I think first and foremost, to something that Nicole said, is that it has to have Black folks, Indigenous folks, and queer folks as the architects of it, of how it's structured, how it's made, how it operates. And I think that when you get back to those ways of thinking, those are communities that think very innovatively. And, we have yet to see a huge sea of institutions that are run by, led by, created by those particular groups and that intersection of folks. I think that that's something that I dream of. But I think all of the things that we're talking about here of like, just the gender violence and the 40-hour work week, all these different things I think would be rethought if we really had those kinds of feminist institutions, and if we had Black and Indigenous and queer folks at the center of it.
I guess part of this is why this is my question. I mean, it sometimes seems confusing that when we talk about institution, when we're talking about the Artist Run, because the Artist Run constantly talks about itself being not institutional. Yet most of the people who kind of engage in it are somehow working kind of for or against institution, and institution is always kind of the specter in the background. Oftentimes we see spaces very much emulate institutions, and then the spaces that don't, I think Joanna kind of pointed out, sometimes get so entrenched in where they are emulating or where they're pushing against that they forget that they have to open themselves up to other thoughts and ideas. And specifically, that has been an occurrence over and over again with white women allowing people of color into their institutions. And I'm just gonna do a quick recap because I think it's worth doing. So pardon me, as I've been looking down, I've been taking notes. So usually when you're on like a stage, it doesn't make you look like a jerk, but when you're on Zoom, it kind of makes you look like a jerk. So I'm just gonna go talk about this for a second. Making is at the center of the project. There is room for assessment and reflection. We have humor at the center, interdependence, and we can talk about kind of how people share space, and there's space for disagreements. Down with the 40-hour work week, and here's where I will add mine. You should have 2 people for every 1 full-time position that is considered there, because that is a way, when we talk often about in current institutions where Tempest was kind of talking about, like, we have these women running these big institutions, yet they still are not feminists, in all honesty. They don't make the allowances for family and humanity. And I think one of the things is like, we're always talking about how much room there is at the table, right? So someone quits and suddenly, an institution wants to diversify. So they're like, oh, well, we must find, a certain person that fits this identity to put this in, rather than sit at the table, right? So we're talking about how much room there is at the table. Well, the table was made by a whole bunch of racist white men. So if the table is made from a whole bunch of racist white men, it sort of doesn't matter who you put there, because the whole system is made on like a kind of a racist flaw to begin with. Instead, I think we need to break the table and sit on the floor until we can figure out how to make a new one, right? So one of that is like, instead of thinking that there's one person who's like a head curator, why do we not have 5 people who are head curators? Why do we not then have 10 assistant curators? A lot of that is centered around money and economy, but there's money out there. Like, even in the economy as it is right now, our billionaires are getting like wealthier by the day. There's plenty of money out there. So, why can't we have, instead of, 100 full-time faculty members in a college, why don't we have 300, right? And they teach a 1 or 2 course load each instead of a 4 course load each, right? So suddenly you are forced to collaborate by the very systems themselves. Sorry, I just threw my own thing in there. Okay, so it makes room for families. Justice is a priority, and a priority of promoting to leadership queer people, women people, BIPOC people, to make sure that those people are really involved in the actual running of the museum. There's a chance to reassess. We are listening to young people. We know what is unacceptable. It's a really good one. And there's a safe space for women and a safe space for physical safety. That is kind of baked in. And I would inquire that it's also a safe space for physical safety, because I also know that many, many people of color often feel policed by the security people in the museums that they're going to see. And that doesn't happen in a feminist institution either, right? And that is, so I'm just, I just wanted to kind of go through the notes. I know we all just said it again, but it's worth saying again, because I think that this question is the key to having an equitable world of making and culture. And one of the things in the Artist Run is it's not always equitable. And it hasn't always been equitable, and how it's been archived hasn't always been equitable. Everyone has done these there have been amazing books written about the Artist Run in Chicago, but they've always been attached to space. And when you attach things to space, then you have the money for the space. So that means we're leaving a lot of artistic and cultural activity out. This book and kind of the projects that all of these women here have kind of worked on do not attach to space for often very, very specific reasons. I guess the Hull House being an exception, although many of the projects are not attached. Many of the kind of tenants are not necessarily attached to space. So I feel like we have time for one more question before we are supposed to open it up to Q&A. So I just want to kind of talk about, so in this book, I'm going to hold it up again. There are approximately, 46, 48, 50 projects that we talk about over the course of 100 some odd years. And then there's even more kind of that we talk about that each of these people on this stage have talked about in the various projects that they kind of brought to light in the book. And then there's a lot of questions. And I guess what is, I'm sorry, Doug, I don't know who you are, but yes, a feministo. I think I pronounced that right. I want to cry over that statement. So I just want to, I'm going to go back to the question now. So I just want to kind of talk about that in 2019, when we closed the show, these were the projects that we found. Are there some things happening now, or some things you're seeing now that feel like they've popped up since the book came? And let's, shout out as many projects as we can. And I'm going to start with Mel.
You put me on the hot seat. I mean, A Long Walk Home did not start. The A Long Walk Home has been around for a while, but when I'm thinking about responsive projects right now, to me, I go back to them over and over and over again. I think it is such an important organization. We need hundreds more of them. I also just, am watching my women students participate in the protests and feel like they may not be galvanized as their own group, but they are galvanized when they enter the space of the movement and the march. And that's incredibly powerful to watch. That's something that I think will probably spur a lot of projects and ideas. And I'm also watching my students engage it in their artwork. So, a lot of people are bringing that material into how they're producing now. So those are some of my thoughts. I can't think of any specific organizations since the book launched. I hope some brilliant person here will have that content. I'm passing the baton to my friend Nicole.
I'm glad you picked me because I just thought of something and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna forget. And I wrote it down and then I still forget stuff. So yeah, I wanna say again, yeah, that small is all is totally on my mind that Irina Zardov worked on is just kicking off right now. But like one of the things that I think is happening now that we can't see, that we may not ever see actually because of the way that this world is organized right now, is the organizing and the projects that are happening not in a site, right? Or kitchen table organizing, the stuff that people are doing from their house. There's so many more people that can get together, right? In ways that couldn't get together before. I think I'm really excited about the Black and Indigenous organizing that's happening, like not just here in Chicago, but that's very powerful too. But I just saw Abolition on Stolen Land talk like a week ago that blew my mind. I'm ready, for this next step that we have to take. And there's a lot of people with a lot of really good plans that are now everybody's able to hear it, right? We're getting a little bit closer to being able to hear it. I'm able to play these things in my classes, right? Instead of, saying, oh, I heard there was a conference at UC Riverside. No knocks against UC Riverside. I'm just saying, like, we can't all go. You know what I mean? And now it's online and everybody can see it. So people that might have had a sort of peripheral interest in things are able to get together. But I don't know what it's going to look like when we get out, when we make it to the other end of this, what all the organizing that's happening very quietly in a small way among people that might not need to make things for their institution to see it or for a gallery to see it, because galleries aren't really doing their thing right now, right? Everything is shifting. There's other places and other venues and other sort of people on the receiving end, right? I'm real worried about little kids right now. I think about them. If I talk about it, I'll probably weep. So I'm really wondering what, like, our energy's been pointed in the wrong direction for a long time, and a lot of places are very top heavy in terms of organization. And yeah, it's time for us to look at our vulnerable folks, right? And see what's happening next. Yeah, I think there's going to be so much amazing, but possibly not for, the art show work that's happening, and a lot of reflection, a lot of critical reflection, and a lot more consideration of mic passing. I think people getting stuck on the internet and getting slapped around by young people who really, they're not putting up with nonsense right now. I want to assign some people to just interneting right now so they can get it right. Yeah, I think a lot of people are getting some new ideas that way though, right? And hearing a lot broader group of people talk, and that's been fantastic. I don't know. What do you think, Tempest?
Yeah, just to refresh the question is what editions since the book came out, since the exhibition would potentially land there. Okay. There's so many, and I think the previous question of what does a feminist institution or organization or artist collective or look like is an interesting one, because I think I think there are folks that may not themselves identify specifically as feminists, but how we're defining it or how we're thinking about it within this space kind of brings them into this conversation. And I think about a lot of the groups that similar to what Nicole's saying, is that are organizing, that are being led by artists, but it's not necessarily like some kind of output of a thing, of something consumable, other than like the the movement work that is happening and the message, you know. So I think about like Brave Space Alliance, incredible group that's got artists infused throughout. I think about the Black Abolitionist Network and all the groups that are a part of that, of like Let Us Breathe, or even like Monica Trinidad was mentioned earlier, and For the People Artists Collective. You know, I think about them. I think about the, what was it, the Southside Distribution Hub Network. It was a Southside Food Distribution Network that was largely, at least the one that that I spent a little bit of time at Overton Elementary, was run primarily by women, women artists of that. You know, I think about those folks right now. They would be definitely added to the addendum or the next edition of the exhibition or the catalog. I also think about, you know, a lot of someone brought up earlier, the work that's been happening around, I think about like MCA Accountable, the group that came together, or the Black faculty at SAIC, Black students at SAIC, Black staff at SAIC. There are a lot of women and queer folks and femmes in the background of those. So I think those would end up, you know, in the future chapters of the book. Yeah, so that's where my mind kind of goes. And then pass it on to Joanna.
So I guess as a historian, I don't have more suggestions, but I think what I've really appreciated is sitting back and learning that a lot of these groups have become more visible to me through social media and following, like Tempest, you said, the faculty and students at the School of the Art Institute. Even my other son is at Walter Payton, where there's a whole Instagram feed about racism in the institution, which provides a whole kind of dialogue with my own kids. So those things have been really important to rethink and maybe redirect the way I understand the city of Chicago, where people intersect, where these histories are not made visible. Jennifer.
So I've been paying attention to, I guess this is not before the book, but it's certainly been alongside, like, energized since the book was published, energized by all that's happening, including the reflection and the civic unrest. I'm thinking about the debate over memorials and monuments, and how so much of that is questioning the past and conventions. And, you know, I really think it's important to have feminist interventions in that conversation, not just because the landscape, you know, public art landscape is so scarce with women and trans and queer communities, but also just having people who are part of that process rethinking, you know, how we even define what should be memorialized and how it's memorialized, like thinking about the existing monuments. So not just adding, you know, more women, because really there only are, like, you know, 5 in New York, statues in New York, and out of like 150 that are of men, but also just thinking, like, of the existing monuments, what sort of patriarchal values are those representing that we can work against and create new monuments and memorials. And I think, you know, we're seeing some of that. So it's sort of exciting to see. I was just thinking of, as everyone was talking, Wangechi Mutu's work in New York. I mean, it's not a Chicago conversation, but The New Ones Will Free Us, even the title, with her 2019 bronze sculptures that are, like, basically have changed the facade of the Met Museum, which is, like, you know, over 100 years old, and with new depictions of gender and womanhood and race, and she's just, you know, all of her work is so stunning and visible and it's impactful. But even Simone Lee, who I believe is originally from Chicago and who's just is going to be representing, it was announced, the Venice Biennial for the U.S. in the Venice Biennial in 2022, and her work on the High Line, New York, and Amanda Williams, who's here in Chicago, is part of the artist team that's going to be creating a whole new monument to Shirley Chisholm in Brooklyn, who, if you don't know her, you should, learn everything about her, especially now on the eve of this election. But, thinking about Amanda's design that they were selected for, they're creating this design not only to draw attention to her legacy, but also the path that she created for other Black women of color in politics. So I think it's just interesting how feminists are entering into this conversation about memorials and monuments and redefining all of that, like this public art, the set of values, and I think it's important to do that. So I've been paying attention to that. Did everybody go? Meg?
No, oops. Damn it. All right. Sorry, I got my mute wrong. Melissa, did you comment on this yet? No, yes, you did.
I did. I just put something. I mean, y'all are so hot. But of course, when you have a conversation like this, 10 million things come to mind, which is amazing. But I just put in the chat, I can't believe I forgot. It's the Sarah Super and her memorial to sexual assault survivors that just opened in Minneapolis. What? First of its kind. But Tempest, thank you so much. Also, it's like, I have to shake all that hierarchy out of my own head. I was really, when I was asked this question, was really thinking very structurally around like, a feminist by, a box. And this was a great conversation because it made me think of 100 new possibilities.
It's hard to kind of take the hierarchies out of your own head, let alone out of the world. I feel like I'm constantly trying to recheck myself and find like the bounds of how I understand definitions as both boxes and tools, right? Definitions are tools, but they can also be boxes, and those boxes are not always the best containers. I believe that I am supposed to say that we are opening this up to questions. Yep.
I think there was already a question too, right? Back there somewhere.
Hello, everybody. There was a question in the chat, and I will help, so that you all can focus on continuing this amazing dialogue. I will help try to pull any other questions that get added. So just a message to everybody out there in the audience. You can put a question in the chat, or also there's a little Q&A button on Zoom that you can send a question to. But the first question was kind of specific to like asking about feminist art practice in Chicago, and maybe kind of in the spirit of this conversation though, maybe you all might want to open it up a bit and talk about what elements of feminist organizing broadly, what's unique about that happening in Chicago. I think all of you have clearly organized and done work here in Chicago that maybe have some reference for other contexts, and I think the person's question was kind of asking, as a new resident of Chicago, they're saying, what is sort of the city specificity around feminist art practice and maybe feminist organizing more broadly? And I really love the everyone passing the microphone. So whoever wants to sort of talk about like what they feel are kind of like the special specifics around feminist organizing in Chicago, please feel free.
I'll start. I just will say something quickly. I'm not a Chicago native. I was in New York for many years, and I'm from LA originally, on the West Coast, East Coast. And one of the things that has struck me about Chicago, especially when I was at Whole House, is that there's such a close connection between art and activism here. And it's really special. I feel like a lot of the artists that we work with, a lot of them identify first and foremost as activists, and vice versa, like artists. I mean, it's interesting to see just how integrated it is. So that's just first thing that comes to mind, is that close connection.
I mean, I'm gonna also answer this one. I think that Chicago has a unique, a kind of a unique thing about being a very large city, but also it has also always been somewhat affordable. And that has made it possible for women to collectivize outside of maybe their full-time employment or full-time childcare in a way that spaces like New York have even been a little harder potentially over the years. Chicago is an interesting place for experimentation and where people often try things out. I'm thinking about, like, although not an art project, but the Silent Sentinels tried it out here before going to Washington, D.C., I believe. And then they were like, oh, and for those of you who don't know who the Silent Sentinels were, they were the women who silently picketed Washington outside the White House and ended up going to jail and were beaten. And actually probably that action helped push suffrage through. And that was kind of started, it was tried here in Chicago a little bit before, according to one of my amazing friends at the Willard House. And that that kind of experimentation we also see with ARC and Artemisia kind of happening at the same time, like AIR Gallery is, or Elizabeth Lindsay Davis, who was incredibly involved in the National Association for Colored Women in the 20s and before. And she basically wrote the book. She archived all of the Black women's clubs in Illinois. And with that book, you could see kind of the amazing archiving there. So that kind of like archivist spirit kind of hitting Chicago at that time seems really important. And that Chicago feels much more open and easier to move for a little while. As for other cities, I've never lived and participated in those communities or those histories, so it's hard to tell. But Chicago lore would be it could only happen here.
I think, as Jennifer was saying, that art practice is so connected to social practice that meant that the recognition of the art world wasn't always primary in terms of the collective initiatives that were happening. And that meant you just kind of got on with it. Some historians talk about this, you know, you just roll up your sleeves in Chicago and you create something. And I think maybe that has helped. While, you know, and Meg just mentioned AIR in New York, they were very conscious of where they were placed, where their place was in the art world. They were very determined to have an intervention in a very white male art market. And in LA, they wanted to be separatist, but it was a very specific declaration about being outside of the market. And I think in Chicago, it's, you know, it was about community. It was about who was living next door and who you were collaborating with in a lot of ways.
I mean, some of this is that double-edged sword of privilege and obscurity, right? I mean, in Chicago, you have the privilege of it being so much cheaper. I spent half my career in New York City trying to pretend that it was possible to be a middle-class person, have an art career there. But there was a whole extraordinary legacy of, you know, WAC, ACT UP, and things that were just, that was so robust. That's about having 9 million people in proximity to one another. So, you know, here you have the privilege of things being a little more chill, you know, a little easier to live here. We're still ranked one of the most inexpensive cities in the country. Thank you, Chicago, for that. And then on the other hand, as we all know, there's been a real vacuum of attention, and the grant funders, the national grant funders, are appalling. I mean, I've served, Meg and I have served on an undisclosed grant panel where it's like, hello, Chicago, you know, I mean, it's a feminist organization, and we're still having to argue that it's not just about LA and New York. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. A lot of things can happen here, but at the same time, it's very hard to get on a radar. Nationally speaking, that is. Now, locally, we're so good to each other, it's painful. I mean, you know, it's amazing.
I had one thing to add, even though I don't think we necessarily all have to each individually answer every single thing, but the CTU is really intense here. It is the strongest, most amazing. I mean, people have said terrible things about CPS, but like after that CTU struck, like people are like, teachers, yes. And that's a really powerful shift, right? It was like blame everything on teachers right around the time I became a teacher. I felt it, you know, but it's a really incredible thing what evolves around that particular movement. And I think paying attention to all that springs out of that and all that CTU also gives permission for, right? I mean, CTU gave permission for people in New York to do stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like the way that people see what now is a possibility as a result of that. So that's one thing. But activism in general, the way I see what may be happening now or what might happen in the future, and even what's happened in the past, is we don't know. I mean, just 2 days, was that yesterday? Gosh, time is such a blur. Was that yesterday, Tempest, that I was sending you a million messages going, oh my God, I've never seen this image of the thing that I am obsessed about and my entire life evolves around, which is those days in 68. These pictures pop up. And, you know, like I'm just saying, every day I'm finding out about amazing things that people have done in this city, right? That are just sort of like not visible yet, but you know, if it's me, I'm working on it. I'm gonna try and figure out a way to get it out there, become a printmaker again, or whatever I have to do, you know, because I think that what is happening and what's gonna happen, I mean, so much of it has yet to be revealed, you know, and that's keeping me on my toes and actually giving me a lot of energy.
And I know maybe not everybody has to respond, but I just really quickly, one of the things I have to say, you know, when questions about things that are specific, you know, like Chicago specific, or if things are done differently here, I immediately think about the grid and the way that the city is designed and how unique that is and how that just peppers everything. You know, it just influences absolutely everything. So I have to think that a lot of the things, simply geography, you know, Chicago's geography and the way that it's the implications that it has makes it a very specific kind of output that happens here of different, you know, ideas or projects or spaces, all these different things. And then I have to think, you know, go back to the legacy piece. You know, Chicago is you know, we have Jane Addams, we have you know, we have Margaret Burroughs, we have all of these, we have Ida B. Wells, you know, we have just all of these incredible folks who we carry with us into the work that we do currently, that I think that makes it kind of a specific, like what a lot of people do that's in speaking to, in conversation with, and a continuation of the work of the folks that came before us is very specific to here. So I have to think that a lot of what happens here is specific to context.
Yeah, thank you. And Tempest, I just maybe want to follow up a little bit on that, because one of the questions that comes up in your text in the book is someone says that it tells you that they grew up on the West Side and had never heard of Margaret Burroughs, so it was kind of offering you like thanks for participating in that. And I guess, you know, we're getting close to the end of the time, so I kind of just wanted to ask you, Tempest, specifically, but anyone can also pick that up. Like, do you see yourself as part of that tradition, that Chicago-based tradition that you just mentioned, as you know, both connecting to the people that are here and the legacy, and kind of needing to share that, because it's maybe not, the attention isn't being brought to especially feminist organizing and organizers in Chicago and elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I too am not a Chicago born and raised. I'm from Peoria, Illinois. But I always kind of talk about Chicago as where I came of age in my art life, you know, so I became a curator, a writer, you know, I understood, you know, I fell in love with archives here, you know, all of that. So any work that I do now, all of my creative output is definitely I feel that it's directly connected to that because I haven't really spent any, my art life in in any other city. So it's very much so directly connected and inspired by um, a lot of Chicago folks.
Very cool. Thank you. Let me just check in with Meg. Do you want to ask a last question or anything like that?
I wish I had like a really amazing last question to ask, but like I really wanted to know what a feminist institution was, and that was like my big guns. And I could ask it again, and I bet we would have a really amazing answer, but then we'd go over time. Someday I want a panel of architects to ask that too, right? Just so we're clear, I think that I would love to see these thinkers re-answer that question. I would love to see architects re-answer that question. I'd love to see city planners, traffic engineers, people who run the Department of Cultural Affairs. I'd like to see children. Like I'd like to see a whole bunch of people kind of answer that question, because I think only then could we actually like get around. Start to get around like what that might look like, because I don't think a feminist institution to Chicago. I mean, and I actually mean physically. Like I don't think it looks like that. So I'm now just rambling. So those are the things that I kind of think about and like think about taking forward from this question. I think I am going to say hello to Landon, who is currently on Melissa Potter's lap. So hello, Landon. And then say that I did promise to put my email in the chat, which I'm going to do now, for those of you who were hoping this discussion was going to be a little more fact-based. I actually think when we envisioned this panel 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a long time ago, long before actually the book had even gone to print, I think, or just as the book had gone to print, we were thinking probably that it would be a little more fact-based. Yes, you can come close this out. I'm gonna have a little helper close this out. Hey, you could say, you need to sit quietly for a second. So as I think we thought this was gonna be a little more fact-based, but as the change in our circumstances has progressed really rapidly, it seemed more urgent to kind of talk about the things that we talked about tonight. So I am going to put my email in the chat if anyone wants to talk facts or futures, either way. And I want to thank all of our panelists and the whole house, and Anthony and everyone for letting us talk tonight. This was pretty great.
I also want to thank our panelists as well, Meg Duguid, Jonah Garden-Hoggett, Nicole Marquine, Jennifer Scott, Melissa Potter, Tempest Hazel. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you for the kids for joining us as well. If you're thinking about, well, what about youth? What about other kinds of organizing? Up on your screen right now, you'll see our last and final exhibition social justice event, which is November 12th at 6 p.m. We'll be back Chicago time, 6 p.m. Chicago. We'll be back here talking with Therese Quinn, the director of the Museum Studies program at UChicago, and also at University of Illinois Chicago, plus Whole House staff and other folks who are organizing to, and youth who are organizing to make change in the Chicago History Museum. And so join us on November 12th for that. And you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram to learn more about other new and other programs that we're doing through now and for the rest of the year. And of course, you want to purchase Meg Duguid's book and hear more from all these collaborators and writers, go over to Silver Stove Press to purchase the book, support this independent press book. Again, like we also have to support the organizations that are pulling together and producing this material that will help us answer these questions about what is a feminist institution, what is a feminist organization. Again, thank you to Anthony Scepter and for the support of the Museum Studies exhibition program, for partnering with us on this series. And we hope to see all of you back here at Whole House in the virtual world for our next conversation on November 12th. at 6 p.m. Thanks again for all our panelists as well.